All right, Broly and Invincible, episode 12. Let's get it. The wind whipped across the desolate mountaintop, carrying away the last echoes of Nolan's horrific confession. Mark stood frozen, his world reduced to the smiling, reasonable face of the monster who had raised him. Every cherished memory, every flight, every word of advice, every proud pat on the back shattered and reformed into a grotesque lie. The foundation of his life wasn't just cracked. It had been a carefully constructed illusion over a bottomless pit of genocidal intent. Join you? Mark's voice was a broken, disbelieving whisper, barely audible over the howling wind. Tears welled in his eyes, blurring the image of his father. You killed them. You killed all of them. For an empire? For this? He gestured wildly at the sky, at the concept of Viltrum that felt so abstract and vile. Mark, you're thinking with a human heart, Nolan said, his tone patient, as if explaining basic arithmetic to a stubborn child. That sentimentality is a leash they've put on you. Look past it. See the potential. This planet, its resources, its strategic position, it's a jewel, and it will be ours. It is the natural order. The strong guide the weak, and we are the strong. You're a murderer. The scream tore from Mark's throat, raw and guttural. It was the only coherent thought in the maelstrom of his mind. The image of the Guardians' broken bodies, of Beat's final smiling memory at a family gathering with Broly and the Graysons. It flashed before his eyes. Without another thought, driven by pure, unadulterated grief and betrayal, Mark launched himself forward. He swung, a wild, teary-eyed haymaker at his father's face, putting all his nascent Viltrumite strength into the blow. But Nolan didn't even flinch. He simply moved his head a fraction of an inch, letting the fist whistle past his cheek. The force of Mark's missed punch threw him off balance. Resistance is futile, son, Nolan stated, his voice hardening slightly, the first hint of steel beneath the placid exterior. Fighting this? Fighting me. Fighting your own blood. It's a pointless struggle that you cannot win. You only get yourself and possibly your mother hurt. Come to your senses. See the galaxy that awaits you, not this single muddy rock. Staggering from the momentum of his missed punch, Mark gasped for air as his chest heaved with sobs. He refused to let out the logical part of his father's argument. The sheer overwhelming power disparity was a cold knife in his gut. What was he doing? He couldn't win. But he wasn't going to stand by and do nothing. Before the beating could ensue on him, a golden and blue blur shot past him like a vengeful comet. It was immortal. The ancient hero's face was a rictus of pure, undilated rage. Centuries of life and a traumatic death focused into a single explosive moment. Nolan. The name wasn't a shout. It was a promise of retribution, a sound that seemed to tear the very air asunder. He had been waiting in the wings, listening to the vileness, letting the betrayer dig his own grave with his words. Now, with the son's attack serving as a distraction, he struck. Mark, off balance and heartbroken, could only watch as his father, momentarily focused on his lecturing, turned a fraction of a second too late. A mortal's fist, fueled by a rage that transcended death, connected with a sickening, thunderous crack against the side of Omni-Man's head. The impact was unlike anything Mark had ever seen his father endure. Nolan's head snapped to the side violently. A spray of spit and blood misted the air. For the first time in Mark's life, Omni-Man was physically staggered. He was thrown backward several feet, his boots carving deep furrows in the rocky soil before he skidded to a halt. A thin trickle of crimson began to flow from his temple, tracing the path down to his jawline. He slowly raised a hand to touch the wound, his fingers coming away stained with his own alien blood. The look of patronizing patience was gone, and it was replaced by a flicker of genuine surprise and annoyance. Omni-Man's eyes, now burning with a cold, dangerous light, lifted from his bloodied fingers and locked onto a mortal. The surprise was gone, and it was replaced by a wary, contemptuous fury. You, he spat. The word dripped with venom. A gnat that refuses to be swatted. A stubborn stain I should have scrubbed cleaner. He took a deliberate step forward, his entire posture shifting from philosopher king to executioner. Fine. I'll just kill you again. Permanently this time, if I can. Then he moved. With a blinding speed, his hand chopping through the air in a vicious guillotine-like arc aimed directly at Immortal's neck. It was a motion meant to decapitate, to end the nuisance once and for all. Immortal, still surging forward from his punch, had no time to react, but the killing blow never landed. Instead, a solid shimmering wall of vibrant pink energy materialized with a resonant thoom directly in the path of Nolan's strike. His hand slammed into the barrier with a sound like a cathedral bell being struck. The impact sending visible ripples of energy cascading across the pink surface, but the barrier held, unyielding. Nolan's head snapped up, his gaze searching for the source of this new interference. His eyes found her, hovering in the night sky, her hands outstretched and glowing with the same pink light. Adam Eve, her expression a mask of cold, determined fury. "You don't get to do that," she stated, her voice cutting through the mountain air with a sharp clarity. We know what you are, and we're not going to let you get away with your betrayal." Her intervention was a declaration of war from the next generation that he had carelessly underestimated. A low guttural growl rumbled in Omni-Man's chest. The calculated calm was rapidly evaporating by the second. First his son, then the resurrected fossil, and now this girl, this child with her parlor tricks, daring to stand up against him. His focus shifted from the stunned Immortal to the hovering Eve. "You insignificant little wench," he snarled, his voice losing its practiced cadence. He abandoned his attack on Immortal and launched himself at Eve like a missile. The air cracked with the sound of his passage, a sonic boom echoing across the peaks as he closed the distance in a blink. Fist pulled back to smash through, but he never reached her. A massive concussive blast of pure yellow energy slammed into him from the side. It was a perfectly timed shot, hitting him with the force of a naval cannon. The blast didn't pierce his skin, but the raw kinetic force was immense, arresting his forward momentum and sending him spinning off his trajectory. He tumbled through the air before righting himself and landing hard on his feet, his knees bending to absorb the impact, skidding backward across the stones. His furious gaze swept to the new threat. There, on a lower ridge, stood Black Samson, the smoking barrel of his wrist-mounted ion cannon still glowing. The military man's face was set in a grim line, his body encased in the humming upgraded exosuit. "You're not the only one who's been upgrading, Nolan." Samson's voice boomed across the distance. "We learned from the footage of the fights that we have on record. This one's calibrated for your Viltrumite density, I think. This ends tonight." The coordinated attack was no longer a desperate brawl. It was a planned military engagement. Before Omni-Man could launch a counterattack against Samson, a new weight slammed into his back. Powerful, bestial arms, corded with muscle wrapped around his torso and neck, locking him in a crushing full Nelson. It was Monster Girl, having scaled the cliff face in her hulking form. She let out a grunt of immense strain, her fingernails digging into his costume as she squeezed with all her might, anchoring him to the spot. "I've got him," she roared, her voice a distorted echo of her human self. It was the opening Immortal had been waiting for, and with a roar that was pure catharsis, he surged forward again. This time he wasn't aiming to stagger, he was aiming to dismantle. He unleashed a furious, relentless barrage of punches directly onto Omni-Man's face and torso. Crack, thud, crunch. They were not the blows of a hero holding back. These were the blows of a man exacting vengeance for his own murder and the death of his comrades. For the first time, the punches were having a visible, cumulative effect. Nolan's head snapped back and forth under the assault, and a cut opened up above his eye. His lips split, smearing blood across his face. He grunted in pain and surprise. His own hands coming up to try and block, but Monster Girl's hold was too strong. Her leverage was perfect. For a few glorious seconds, the invincible Omni-Man was being beaten up. His superior Viltrumite blood was panting the sacred ground of Earth, a testament to the resilience of the livestock he so despised. The staccato rhythm of Immortal's fist connecting with his face was a profound and unacceptable humiliation. The pain was one thing. The insult of being held in place and pummeled by these inferior beings was another. A switch flipped behind Omni-Man's eyes. The last vestiges of his patient, paternal facade vanished, and it was replaced by the cold, efficient killer that he truly was. With a roar of pure annoyance, He stopped, trying to block. Instead, he jerked his head backward with blinding speed. The back of his skull connected with Monster Girl's face with a sickening wet crunch. She cried out, a pained, gurgling sound, "Ugh!" as her nose and cheekbones shattered. Her grip loosened instantly, and she stumbled backward, clutching her ruined face. Freed from her hold, Omni-Man moved with a fluid, brutal economy. As Immortal threw his next punch, Nolan's hand shot out and caught the fist. There was a moment in strained tension, and then Immortal's raw, vengeful power against Nolan's Vicious strength. Then, with a simple, cruel twist of his wrist, Nolan broke Immortal's arm. The sound of snapping bone was horrifically loud. Immortal gasped. "Ah!" His face paling, his attack faltering. Not wasting a millisecond, Nolan pivoted, grabbing a stunned Monster Girl by the arm, and with one continuous, powerful motion, he used her massive body as a bludgeon, swinging her around, and hurling her directly into the injured Immortal. The two heroes collided with a bone-jarring impact and were sent flying together. A tangled mess of limbs in pain, crashing into a jagged outcropping of rocks 50 yards away, where they lay still amidst a cloud of dust and debris. The brief, hopeful moment of their advantage was over, crushed by the absolute terrifying power of a Viltrumite, who had stopped talking and started fighting in earnest. The night air felt different now, charged with a tension that had nothing to do with his own inner turmoil. After hours of solitary contemplation on the rooftop, a deep instinctual pull had drawn Burley back to the Graysons' house. It wasn't a retreat, but a return to his anchor. He landed softly on the front lawn, the familiar sight of the warm-lit windows, usually a balm to his spirit, but tonight the silence felt off. It felt wrong. He found Debbie, not inside, but standing on the porch, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if she were cold. Despite the mild evening, she was staring into the middle distance, her face pale and etched with worry so profound it made Broly's chest tighten. She jumped slightly when his shadow fell across her. "Broly," she breathed, her voice thin and strained. "You're back." "Debbie?" he rumbled, his voice low with concern. He stopped a few feet away, not wanting to crowd her. "What is wrong?" It's Nolan and Mark," she said, her words tumbling out in a worried rush. "Immortal was here. He's alive, Broly, and he was so angry. He demanded Nolan and Mark go with him. They all left together, and it didn't feel right. Immortal looked like he wanted to tear the whole world apart." A cold knot formed in Broly's stomach. Immortal. One of the guardians who had fallen the night Beats vanished. If anyone knew the truth about what happened, it was him. A fragile, desperate hope, one he had never dared to fully entertain, flickered to life. Maybe Immortal saw what happened to Beats. Maybe he knew who was responsible. His gaze sharpened, focusing on Debbie. "What direction did they go?" he asked, his voice dropping to an intent, gravelly tone. Debbie pointed a trembling hand towards the distant dark silhouette of the mountains. "That way. They flew that way. Broly, please, just check on Mark. Make sure he's okay." Broly gave a single sharp nod. "I will bring him back." But his mind was already racing ahead, towards the mountains and the resurrected hero. He needed to find his friend, but the burning unspoken question now gave his mission a new urgent purpose. Immortal might know what happened to Beats. Without another word, he crouched and launched into the sky. A green-tinged arrow shot towards the epicenter of the confrontation. He could now slightly feel vibrating through the very air. Omni-Man stood amidst the settling dust, the broken forms of Immortal and Monster Girl, a testament to his effortless power. His chest rose and fell steadily, the only sign of exertion being the dark Viltrumite blood smeared across his face and knuckles. His gaze, cold and dismissive, swept over the remaining heroes who had emerged from the shadows. Robot, Rex, the many forms of Duplicate, and the hovering Adam Eve. A faint, contemptuous smile touched his lips. "You poor, deluded creatures," he began, his voice low and condescending rumble that carried over the wind. "You still believe this is a battle, that there are sides to be chosen, a victory to be won." He shook his head, slowly, a teacher disappointed by his slowest students. "The reason I didn't exterminate you all after I scrubbed the Guardians from this world wasn't mercy. It wasn't oversight." He took a single deliberate step forward, and the entire line of heroes instinctively tensed. It was because you are irrelevant. You are gnats, annoying at best, and ultimately inconsequential to the grand design. What, you? Or maybe the Mauler twins? Petty thugs? That fur-clad barbarian, a wandering beast? And you? His eyes lingered on each of them. You are children playing with toys you barely understand. My empire plans for the star systems. You are a temporary localized irritation and not a threat. Your defiance isn't noble. It's a symptom of your pathetic, limited perspective of life. You fight for a planet that is already ours. You just haven't realized it yet. Before the sting of Omni-Man's words could fully settle, Robot acted. Without a sound, a dozen of his sleek orange combat drones shot from concealed positions in the surrounding rock, their thrusters screaming. They swarmed Omni-Man like mechanical hornets, firing concentrated energy beams and launching high explosive projectiles. Nolan didn't even bother with a grand defense. He moved through the swarm with brutal, economical precision. A flick of his wrist shattered one drone into a shrapnel. A backhand swipe sent two more careening into each other in a fiery explosion. He weaved through the laser fire, the beam scorching the ground where he had been a microsecond before. It was a dance of utter destruction, and he was the lead. The drones, for all their advanced programming, were nothing but target practice, their attacks merely hurting him slightly higher into the air as he contemptuously dismantled them. This was precisely what Cecil Stedman, watcher from the Pentagon, had calculated. As Omni-Man tore the last drone in half, momentarily hovering in the open air, a column of pure incandescent white energy lanced down from the heavens. It was silent for a fraction of a second before the sound arrived, a world-shattering crack that felt like the sky itself was breaking. A satellite cannon's beam, a concentrated piece of a star's fury, struck Omni-Man squarely in the back. There was no dodging, no blocking. The force was absolute, plucking him from the sky and hammering him into the mountain peak below. The impact sent a shockwave outwards, vaporizing rock and sending a plume of debris and superheated dust hundreds of feet into the air. And for a moment he was gone, buried under the very earth that he had claimed to own moments before. The mountain peak groaned, a deep tectonic sound of protest from the heart of the crater left by the satellite strike. A figure stirred. A hand, then an arm, shoved aside a multi-ton slab of rock as if it were a styrofoam. Omni-Man rose from the rubble, shaking his head like a dog shedding water. Fine. Gray dust cascaded from his shoulders and blood-red cape. His costume was scuffed, marred by blackened streaks from the concentrated energy, and a single dark trickle of Viltrumite blood ran from his left nostril down to his lip. He wiped it away with the back of his hand, staring at the crimson smear with a look of mild, irritated surprise. That, he muttered. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble. It was actually somewhat inconvenient. Seeing their ultimate weapon had barely scratched him, a wave of despair threatened to wash over the remaining heroes. But Rex Splode, ever the chaotic spark in the face of overwhelming odds, refused to freeze up. "Eat this, you sanctimonious bastard!" he screamed, his voice cracking with a mix of terror and fury. He slapped his hands together, and a volley of glowing, unstable energy orbs shot from his palms. They streaked toward Omni-Man, detonating against his chest and face in a series of concussive, colorful explosions. Red, orange, and yellow blooms of fire and shrapnel that momentarily obscured him from view. When the smoke cleared, Omni-Man was still standing, brushing a piece of smoldering debris from his chest, and an expression of profound boredom. The explosions hadn't left a mark. "Fireworks," he declared, his voice cutting through the ringing in everyone's ears. "You insult my capabilities with weak fireworks." His eyes now locked onto Rex. The time for his lectures were over. In a blur of motion too fast for the human eye to track, Omni-Man shot toward Rex. His intent was clear and horrifically simple: to close the distance and physically tear the young hero in half, a brutal demonstration of the futility of their resistance. Rex's eyes widened, his bravado vanishing. Oh, shit. Replaced by the primal understanding of imminent death. But he never reached him. A massive granite-colored form intercepted him with the force of a landslide. Titan, having used the distraction to close in, slammed his rock-hard weight into Omni-Man's side. It was like a boulder hitting a freight train, but it was enough to alter the Viltrumite's trajectory. The two of them crashed to the ground, skidding through the dirt and rock. "Don't forget about me, you son of a bitch," Titan roared, his voice a grinding avalanche of sound. He pinned Omni-Man beneath him, his stony fists rising and falling like pile drivers. Thud, crunch, thud. Each impact sent shockwaves through the ground, cratering the earth around Omni-Man's head, and for a few seconds it was a raw, visceral display of power. Titan, the crime lord who had been strong-armed into this fight, was now pouring every ounce of his enhanced strength into pummeling the man who represented the ultimate universe-sized bully. He wasn't fighting for Earth's freedom, but for the simple, desperate right to survive. The pummeling lasted only a moment, and with a snarl of pure annoyance, Omni-Man planted his hands on the ground and erupted upward, his power effortlessly overcoming Titan's weight. He shot into the air, dragging the rock-skinned man with him by the throat. "Huh, you want to be useful in this fight? You want to be useful to them?" Omni-Man growled, his voice cold. "Fine, I'm going to make you useful, but you'll be useful to me." He reversed the momentum and, with a devastating surge of speed, slammed Titan back down into the mountain peak. The impact was catastrophic. A web of deep fissures radiated out from the point of impact, and a sickening cracking sound echoed as fracture spread across Titan's stony hide. Omni-Man didn't even pause. He ripped a large man-sized chunk of rock, what was once part of Titan's shoulder and chest, free from the moaning hero's body. Hero in quotes, of course. In a display of terrifying creativity, Omni-Man clenched his fist, pulverizing the massive chunk of rock into a cloud. Sharp bullet-like pebbles with a contemptuous flick of his wrist, he hurled the shrapnel cloud at the other heroes like a shotgun blast. "Scatter," Robot commanded. Dozens of duplicates reacted instantly, several of her bodies throwing themselves in front of their teammates. The rocky projectiles tore through them. Her forms were riddled with bullets of stone, but their sacrifice protected the others. Almost all. Rex was a fraction of a second too slow, and a sharpened stone shard moved at hypersonic speed, slicing clean through his bicep. He cried out, "Ah!" stumbling back and clutching the suddenly bleeding grievous wound. The fight was costing them pieces, one by one. For the jagged outcrop, Mark pushed himself. His heart was in tatters, but his eyes were clear. He had watched his friends be broken, battered, and shot down for the crime of defending their home. He saw Rex clutching his bleeding arm, saw bleeding bodies full of holes where case duplicates had been sprayed down, saw Titan lying broken in the crater of his own body. The last thread of hope that his father could be reasoned with snapped. A guttural roar torn from place of pure unadulterated heartbreak erupted from Mark's throat. He shot forward, no longer the hesitant son, but a force of nature. He used every ounce of his strength, every iota of speed his Viltrumite heritage had given him, channeling all his pain, betrayal, and rage into a single perfect punch. Omni-Man, momentarily distracted by his own brutal display, turned a hair too late. Mark's fist, clad in a torn yellow glove, connected with the sound like a clap of thunder against his father's temple. It was not a blow that could defeat him, but it was a blow that stung. Omni-Man's head snapped to the side. He didn't cry out, but the sharp grunt was forced from his lips. He took a single stumbling step backward, his boot scraping against the rock. He slowly turned his head back to face his son, his eyes wide, not with pain, but with sheer uncomprehending shock. His own son had just made him stumble. For these insects. "You," was all Omni-Man could manage, the word laced with a storm of conflicting emotions. Outrage, pride, and a flicker of something that might have been slight fear at his potential. "That's right," Mark panted, his fist clenched, tears still streaking through his grime on his face. "Me." Omni-Man's shock crystallized into cold fury. "You still don't understand." He lunged his own fist, flashing out to strike Mark's jaw. The impact was brutal, sending a spiderweb of cracks across Mark's face and whipping his head around. But Mark didn't fly backward as expected. Instead, he held his ground, spitting a glob of violet blood. The reason was evident. An intricate form-fitting armor of interlocking pink carbon plates had materialized around his torso, shoulders, and head at the moment of impact, absorbing and dispersing the force. From her vantage point, Adam Eve hovered, hands outstretched, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I've got you, Mark," she called out, her voice strained but steady. Emboldened, Mark pressed the attack, weaving under another of his father's swings and delivering a sharp jab to his ribs. As Omni-Man recoiled, Eve didn't just defend, she created a massive pink construct of a wrecking ball swung from a chain. She manifested in midair, slamming into Omni-Man's back and driving him forward, right into Mark's next punch. It was the best synergy of the battle. Mark was the blade, and Eve was the shield, the weapon and the strategist. They were a team, and for the first time, Omni-Man was forced to block and dodge, his expression shifting from contempt to focused, grudging respect for the coordinated assault. The brief coordinated assault from Mark and Eve had forced Omni-Man onto the defensive, a novel and irritating experience. As he blocked a reinforced punch from Mark, he shrugged off the shattering of a pink energy construct. A strange, grim smile touched his bloody lips. "Impressive," he admitted, the word a low rumble of genuine, if condescending, acknowledgement. "Truly, to see you fight with such passion for these chattel, it proves your genes are strong." But the praise was a trap. In a split second, Mark registered the words. His father moved. He dropped his guard, taking a weak blow from a pink energy mace, and delivered a devastating uppercut under Mark's chin. The impact lifted Mark off his feet, the world spinning into a dizzying blur of sky and mountain. Before gravity could reclaim him, Omni-Man was above him, a dark silhouette against the stars. "But you have so much to learn," he roared. He stomped down with both boots, hammering Mark in the chest and driving him back to the earth like a meteor. The crater he created was twice as deep as any before. Omni-Man landed gracefully at its edge, looking down at his son's broken form. Mark groaned, struggling to push himself up. The reinforced armor Eve had created was now cracked and flickering away. Nolan's voice softened, taking on a paternal, almost wistful tone that was more terrifying than his rage. "You're strong, son. So strong. And that's why I'm not worried." He knelt at the crater's rim, his eyes burning with a fanatical certainty. "You'll see. When you've lived a couple 100 years and watched everyone you know today turn to dust, you'll understand. This pain, this attachment, it will fade, and you will come to see the light of your true destiny. I'm sure of it." His lecture to his son concluded. Omni-Man's gaze lifted, his eyes now devoid of all paternal softness, locked on to Adam Eve. The calm certainty on his face was morphed into a cold, pragmatic finality. "But it is a shame," he said, his voice dropping to a conversational, chilling pitch, "that she won't be around to see it. A distracting influence." He didn't roar. He didn't telegraph the attack. He simply blitzed, becoming a flesh-colored streak that tore through the space between them. Eve gasped, her hands flying up. A series of thick hexagonal pink walls materialized in his path, each one capable of withstanding a direct artillery strike. But Omni-Man plowed through them as if they were glass. Boom, crack, shatter. The sound was a rapid-fire detonation of failing energy. Shards of pink light exploded outward like crystalline shrapnel. He didn't slow, didn't deviate. His fist aimed directly at her heart, punched through her final desperate shield. Time seeming to stretch, Eve saw the unstoppable fist, the cold resolve in his eyes, the shimmering fragments of her own power falling around her like dying fireflies. There were no more tricks, there were no more constructs in the way. Her energy was spent, and a final quiet thought of regret for the world she wanted to build, for Mark, for Broly, flashed through her mind. She closed her eyes, bracing for the oblivion that would follow the certain world-ending attack, world-ending impact. The impact never came. Instead, a shockwave of force, silent and immense, radiated outward, shaking the very mountain to its core. The air itself seemed to solidify, pressing in on her. The sound that followed was not a punch landing, but a deep resonant thump, like the beating of a primordial heart, followed by the sickening crunch of a stressed stone underfoot. Eve dared to open her eyes. A massive, broad-shouldered form stood rooted between her and Omni-Man, a living, breathing bulwark. It was Broly. He had arrived not with the thunderous crash, but with the silent absolute finality of a mountain setting into place. Omni-Man's fist was not buried in her chest. It was caught, completely and utterly, in Broly's open palm. The Saiyan's fingers were wrapped around Nolan's knuckles, halting the killing blow with an ease that defied physics and comprehension. Not a single muscle in Broly's arm trembled. The force that could vaporize a building had been neutralized into nothingness. Broly didn't even look at Eve. His head was tilted slightly down, his wild black hair shadowing his eyes, but she could see his profile. And the expression there was not one of a berserker rage, but of a cold, terrifyingly focused calm. He had not just stopped the punch. He had absorbed its entire universe of kinetic energy without moving an inch. The silence that hung between the three of them was louder than any explosion, broken only by the faint, ragged sound of Omni-Man's own annoyed intake of breath. Alright, that's where we're going to end this, man. Hope you guys liked it. We're heating up. There's only 2 episodes left. So, yeah, man. Be sure you like, comment, subscribe, all that. Super chat's open. Y'all can join the memberships, all that. Catch y'all on the next one. Peace.